Hi, I'm Leah Monroe. 3 weeks ago, I came home from a 14-hour night shift with 2 bruises on my wrist, 3 death pronouncements in my file, and a craving for cold toast and silence. Instead, I walked in and saw my name crossed off a deed like I'd never existed. My brother Eli didn't flinch. His fiancée smiled. And they kept signing. No one asked how many people died in my hands that night. No one asked how many years I held this house together while they built a life behind my back. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was quiet. It was in the small things. Like birthday cards I never got. The way my extra key disappeared. The family group chat that stopped including me. It was in the way Eli started calling me exhausted, fragile, and unstable. Right before he filed to take the house, I raised him. I gave up college, gave up California, gave up any shot at my own life, just to make sure he had one. But when I walked in that night, they didn't even pause. They erased me with the same pen I used to sign every school form he ever had. So now tell me, what do you think happened after I sat down on that cold staircase and stayed silent? Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. The house wasn't always like this. There was a time when it smelled like burnt toast and Eli's gym socks and the lemon soap Mama used right before she died. I was 25 when the truck took them both. Just one call, one highway, one night, and suddenly I was the only thing standing between Eli and foster care. So I stayed, gave up Johns Hopkins, turned down that scholarship to San Diego, boxed up my white coat dreams there and applied for the trauma unit downtown. Shift started at 7 p.m., ended when the bleeding did. I told Eli we'd be okay, that I'd cook breakfast before school, that he could still try out for football. He was 10. He cried into my uniform the night I cut his sandwich into stars because I didn't know what else to do. I did what big sisters do. I became mom, dad, and a paycheck in one tired body. No one taught me how to raise a boy. But I figured out enough. Dinner at 5:30, rent by the 1st. Cough syrup at midnight. I kept every field trip form in a folder. Paid every overdue book fee, even when it stung. And when the roof leaked in his bedroom, I slept on the wet side. Eli never knew that. He just knew the heater worked by the time his friends came over. He thought the fridge refilled itself. That clothes folded magically. That rent was just a thing that happened. I let him believe it. Because that's what you do when you trade your 20s for someone else's future. You don't complain. You just keep going. Even when the house starts to feel less like yours and more like a waiting room, you can't leave. Even when the boy you raised grows into a man who calls you tired. Like it's a bad word. These days, the house feels like it belongs to someone else. Bethany's plants line the windowsills now. Succulents I never chose in pots I never bought. The hallway smells like her perfume. Not the faint lavender Mama used, but something sharp, like citrus and control. Eli installed a smart speaker that talks back when I don't. It plays low, fi jazz during breakfast, even though I never asked for music. My mug's been moved. The one with the chipped rim I've had for 12 years. It used to sit by the kettle. Now it's in the back cabinet, behind matching sets I've never seen before. The family photos. They're still up, but I'm barely in them. The one of me holding Eli at his 5th grade graduation. Replaced by a beach picture from their Florida trip. I wasn't invited. I worked that week. The notes I leave on the fridge don't get read anymore. Working late. Don't lock up. Don't forget your allergy meds. Trash pickup moved to Friday. Never once answered. Never once acknowledged. Sometimes I hear them talking when they think I'm asleep. She should consider moving out. Bethany once whispered. She's hardly here. Eli didn't argue. He just sighed, sipped his coffee, and said nothing. I've been in this house every day for 22 years, paid the mortgage, painted the shutters, held Eli through the flu, 2 breakups, and the one time he thought he failed out of college. But now Now my scrubs hang on the back door, like I'm just passing through. I eat dinner on my lap with the TV low, in a kitchen I paid for, but no longer recognize. I come in late, walk past a table set for two, and up the stairs, without turning on the lights. No one asks how my shift was. No one waits up. No one sees me anymore. And I'm starting to wonder if that's the point. I started noticing the way they spoke when they thought I wasn't listening. "When the baby comes, we'll need more space," Bethany said one night as she folded tiny socks at the dining table I'd refinished by hand. Eli just nodded, didn't even glance my way. She kept going. "I found a realtor who works fast. We should talk numbers." That word, we've, stuck in my throat like bad medicine. No one said anything about me. No one asked if I planned to leave. They spoke like the house was already theirs. Like I was a guest, taking too long to go. I wanted to laugh. But it came out as something closer to a cough. Later that week, I came home early. A patient coded halfway through my shift. I just couldn't keep going. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and sat at the desk, where I used to help Eli with spelling words. The desk drawer wasn't fully shut. Inside, a letter, still in the envelope. Bank stationery, addressed to Eli. I shouldn't have looked. But I did, just enough to see the header. Muss, Real Estate Power of Attorney Draft. My name was on it. Or at least, it had been. Now it was scribbled through, a new name typed in. Bethany's. The ink hadn't even dried properly. My fingers curled, but I didn't rip it. Didn't scream. Didn't storm upstairs and demand answers. I just sat there, watching the corner of the paper curl under the ceiling fan breeze. My name crossed out, again. It wasn't even legal yet. But that didn't matter. They were already writing me out of the story. And I was still here, pretending like I had a role. What would you do if you found your name quietly removed from your own home? Would you confront them? Or would you wait and watch what came next? I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. My body shut down for maybe 20 minutes on the living room couch. But my mind kept going, churning through every memory I had ignored for too long. The missed letters. The calls from the bank I thought were just scams. The strange look on Eli's face when I asked if we still split the utilities. I'd brushed it off, because that's what you do when you're too tired to believe the worst. But now, I needed answers. So on my next day off, I stayed home, made a pot of stale coffee, put on my old college sweatshirt, and opened the fireproof box I kept under the stairs. Every important paper I'd saved for 2 decades was still there. Birth certificates, tax returns, power bills, loan statements, bank letters from Southern Federal. I pulled out the most recent one, or what I thought was recent. The envelope had my name, but the inside didn't. Every withdrawal for the past 10 months had been made under a linked access account. Not mine. Not authorized. And the notes, things like home repairs, medical oversight, daily essentials. Words that sounded neutral, but didn't sit right. Especially when I'd been the one paying for groceries, dahlia and bleach, and nurse shoes from my own paycheck. I dug deeper, found another folder. One I hadn't touched in over a year. Inside a faxed copy of a psychological evaluation form from a local clinic. It had my name on top, Leah Monroe, female 47, occupation, trauma nurse. But the signature, it wasn't mine. And the diagnosis box, marked borderline cognitive fatigue, unfit to manage property alone. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. I stared at the signature, shaky, uneven, like someone had tried to copy mine with a reference beside them. I traced it with my finger, once, twice, then closed the folder and sat still in my kitchen chair. The walls didn't shake. The floor didn't fall in. But inside, something cracked quietly. This wasn't just about the house. This was about being erased with paperwork. And Eli. He'd started a long time ago. The next morning, I called the number listed on that fake evaluation. It rang twice before a woman answered. Calm, polite, like she just set down a mug of tea. Savannah Wellness Clinic. This is Meredith. I cleared my throat. Hi. I'm trying to verify if I've ever been a patient there. Silence. Typing. What's your name, ma'am? Leah Monroe. Lie more silence. Clicking keys. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing any records under that name. Did you perhaps go by something else? I almost laughed. No. That's the only name I've ever had. She apologized, offered to double-check, and took my number. But I knew. I hung up and stared at the paper again. The clinic's letterhead looked real, but the ink was uneven, like a printer running low or a scan of a scan. I flipped through the back pages of the bank folders. And that's when I noticed something else. The mailing address had changed. 9 months ago, statements stopped going to my P.O. box and started forwarding to Eli's new apartment downtown. I never signed for that, never asked for a change, and the phone number on file. Not mine. Just one digit off. Enough to look familiar, enough to redirect verification calls to someone else. I sat back in the chair. Not angry, not yet, just cold. A different kind of cold. The kind that wraps around your spine and tells you you've been lied to with intent. I looked at the paper trail. Fake forms, stolen mail, redirected calls. My own signature twisted into something I couldn't recognize. This wasn't an accident. This was a design, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake. No, I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I wasn't going to cry or beg or ask why. I was going to gather. One document. One lie. One silence at a time. I borrowed the office scanner at the hospital that night, slipped in during my dinner break when no one was looking. 3 folders. 26 pages. Labeled in plain black ink. Est Monroe, personal doctress. I saved everything to a flash drive. Then backed it up again to a cloud account Eli didn't know existed. I wasn't tech savvy, but I was a nurse. And nurses learn fast when it matters. After shift, I walked down to radiology. Dr. Sheehan was still there, eating instant noodles from a pink ceramic bowl. He looked up. 12-hour trauma shift, and you're still standing. Barely. I sat beside him and handed over the drive. I need you to hold on to this, I said. And not ask questions. He blinked. Didn't say much. Just nodded and put the drive in his coat pocket. That was enough. The next morning I started watching Eli's movements. His tone. What time he left the house. What papers he carried in. I noticed the way he glanced at his phone before answering questions. The way Bethany checked the mail, but never brought anything in with my name on it. I stopped speaking unless necessary. Stopped offering to help. Stopped reminding them about trash day or Bethany's doctor visits. And still, they didn't notice. That's when I knew. They'd stopped seeing me long before I ever saw the truth. I began writing things down. Dates. Times. Who was in the room when certain conversations happened. I listened for cracks in the story. Bethany once said, "We're signing everything next month." But Eli had told me they were just thinking. Little things. Small lies. Not enough to scream over, but enough to stack, like bricks, quietly building a wall between us. And I let them build it. Let them believe I was too tired, too naive, too soft to fight. But I wasn't tired. Not anymore. I was done being a story someone else got to write. If your family tried to erase your name with paperwork and silence, would you rewrite the ending yourself? It was a Tuesday. The kind where the sky looked washed out and the coffee tasted like cardboard. I sat at the kitchen table, still in scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and adrenaline. Eli walked in, yawning like he'd had the harder night. I stirred my coffee once, twice, then set the spoon down. Quiet. "When did you change the mailing address for Southern Federal?" I asked. He paused mid-pour. The orange juice bottle tilted, just enough to drip on the counter. "What?" he said. "Too fast. The bank. Our joint account. When did you change the address?" He looked down, pretending to wipe the spill. "That must have been a mistake. I didn't touch anything." I nodded slowly. Watched the way his fingers curled around the glass. "A lie," I said, calm as I could manage. "I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here to ask why." He didn't answer. Just grabbed a napkin and folded it 3 times, perfect, like we were strangers at a hotel breakfast. I waited. Didn't fill the silence for him. He sat across from me, eyes avoiding mine, staring instead at the edge of the table he used to color on when he was 10. "I thought it would help," he said finally. "You're busy, always working. I didn't want you to stress over bills." I let the words sit between us. Thin, stretched, empty. "That's not how this works," I said. "You don't help someone by erasing them." But he flinched. Just slightly. But I saw it. Then he straightened his shoulders. "Well, the house needs managing, and Bethany's due soon. We needed to act." I nodded again. The same way I used to when he lied about skipping school. But this wasn't a skipped class. This was my name. My life. Crossed out in ink by the boy I gave everything to. "You didn't ask," I said. He didn't reply. Just stood up, put his untouched juice in the sink, and walked out without another word. I sat there. Still. The hum of the fridge behind me, the weight of his silence heavier than the lie itself. It didn't start with the house. It started with smaller things. Forgettable, if you weren't the one being forgotten. Like the year he skipped my birthday. No card, no text, not even a, "Hey, I've been swamped." I told myself it was fine. That grown siblings don't always remember dates. But he remembered Bethany's dog's birthday. Threw a whole party. Cake and all. Or the time I came home limping. Tore something in my knee, lifting a patient off the trauma bed. I mentioned it once at dinner, braced for concern. Eli just nodded, took another bite of his burger, and asked Bethany about stroller colors. Then there was the dinner I wasn't invited to. Bethany's parents flew in from Tallahassee. Everyone gathered at a restaurant 20 minutes away. I found out because they left the group receipt on the counter. 12 people. No room for 13. No one said anything afterward. "No, sorry. We figured you'd be working." No. It was last minute. Just silence. The kind that tells you you were never part of the plan to begin with. I used to think Eli and I had something unbreakable. Built from the kind of grief you don't recover from. Only grow around. After our parents died, we slept in the same bed for weeks. He curled against me, little hands balled into fists, as if he knew the world might try to take me too. I promised I'd never leave him. He made me pinky swear. And I meant it. I showed up every day for 22 years because of that promise. But promises don't protect you from being replaced. Not by time. Not by partners. Not by silence dressed as convenience. Sometimes I walk past his room and see his shoes lined up at the door. Next to hers. Her bag on the hook I used for my coat. Her voice floating through the hall as if I'm the guest in a house I bought. And I wonder, when exactly did I become the thing they built around? Bethany was alone in the kitchen that afternoon. Wiping the counter like it mattered. Like something was dirty besides the silence. She didn't see me at first. Didn't flinch when I stepped in. Didn't stop humming that same 3-note tune she always played on the speaker. I walked to the fridge, opened it. Closed it, then turned to her. "Do you think I'll leave?" I asked. Her hand paused. Cloth halfway across the granite. She looked at me, smiling in that polite, practiced way people do when they've already made up their minds. "I think," she said, "you haven't really been here for a while." The words landed soft. But they bruised. Like being pushed with 2 fingers until your spine hits the edge of something sharp. I kept my voice steady. "I've lived here 22 years. She nodded. "I know. And I'm sure that's been meaningful." If meaningful. Like a phase. Like wallpaper you appreciate before painting over it. She rinsed the cloth, wrung it out carefully, set it beside the sink. "I don't want this to be difficult," she added. "Eli just wants what's best for everyone." Me everyone. Meaning her, the baby, maybe even the dog they kept talking about getting. I wasn't in the picture. Not even in the margins. I leaned against the counter, stared at the bowl of lemons she kept just for show. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I bought this house. Paid every mortgage check, refinanced it twice to get Illy through college. Fixed the heater. Painted the nursery he never used." Bethany didn't interrupt. Didn't apologize. Just folded her hands and waited for me to finish. "You didn't erase me with a fight," I said. "You did it with politeness. With brunch invites I never got. With plans whispered one room away." She tilted her head. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Not. I'm sorry for what we did." "Not. You're right." Just that neat little sentence, designed to end the conversation without owning a thing. I walked away. Back upstairs. Past the hooks that no longer held my coat. Past the stairs that still creaked like they remembered me. And I thought, if someone erases you without raising their voice, without slamming a door, without saying your name, is it still betrayal, or is it something worse? It was supposed to be a routine shift. Back to back admits, a burn victim from a garage fire, and an elderly woman who kept asking for someone named Franklin. Around 300 a.m., I ran into Ava Campbell in the hallway. Pediatric resident, sharp eyes, always moved like her shoes were on fire. She held 2 coffee cups. Held one out. "You look like you're 3 heartbeats from collapsing." I took it. Nodded. "Make that 2. We sat near the break room. 10 minutes of silence, sipping burnt caffeine under fluorescent lights that never fully stopped buzzing. She glanced at my badge. "You're Leah Monroe, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Depends who's asking." She laughed. "Campbell's my dad, John Campbell. Real estate lawyer. Used to do wills and estates back in the day." The name hit me like a cold draft. I sat up straighter. "I think he helped my parents once. Years ago. Their house." She nodded. "He still keeps old records. Handwrites everything. Drives my mom insane." I hesitated. Heart pounding now. But not from exhaustion. "Could I ask him something? It's probably a long shot, but it's about the deed to my house. It used to be in my parents' name. Now it's complicated." Ava blinked, then fished into her pocket. "Give me your number." He still uses a flip phone and a yellow legal pad. "But I'll tell him to call you." I handed her my number. Fingers shaking just a little. That was Thursday. By Sunday morning, he called. Same calm voice I half remembered from a courthouse hallway 20 years ago. "Said your name stuck with me, Leah. Your father, Marvin Monroe. He was a straight shooter. Kept every promise. Even the hard ones." We spoke for 20 minutes, mostly about signatures, dates, one old safe box in his storage that still held the original deed and will. "I'm looking at it now," he said. "No amendment, no transfer. The house was left to you. Sole beneficiary. It's never been lawfully reassigned." I didn't speak. Not right away. I just sat at the edge of my bed, phone pressed against my ear, watching the sun crawl across the hardwood floor like it had somewhere else to be. "Lee," he said gently. "You still there?" I swallowed. "Yeah, I'm here." He cleared his throat. "You want a copy? I can notarize it tomorrow." "Less," I said, too fast, then again quieter. "Yes, please." We hung up, and I just sat there. The house was never his, never Bethany's, never part of some generous handover for their growing family. It had always been mine. They just hoped I'd never check. The envelope came on Tuesday. Heavy, stock paper. Embossed seal from John Campbell's office. I didn't open it right away. Just stood in the hallway, holding it like it might burn through my hands. Bethany was upstairs, on a call about crib dimensions. Eli was in the garage, pretending to fix a shelf he never installed. I walked into the living room, past the couch with throw pillows I didn't pick, and sat on the rug, where Eli used to build Lego cities, when he was too small to understand death. I opened the envelope carefully. No rush, no panic, just precision. Inside, a notarized copy of the will. My father's signature in firm, familiar ink. My name, not just printed but circled. Twice. sole beneficiary, full ownership, dated 2 months before the accident. I traced the edge of the paper with the tip of my thumb. Felt the weight of all the years I'd carried without question. Then I stood, walked over to the mantel, lifted the framed photo of my parents, the one taken a year before we lost them. Mama in her Sunday dress, Daddy in his best blue suit, Eli and I in matching shoes. I turned the frame over, taped the will to the back, secured it with a fresh strip of packing tape, pressed it flat, then put the photo right back where it had always been. Centered. Still, untouched. That night I made spaghetti. Enough for 3, though only 2 ever joined the table now. Eli came in first. Loosened his tie, tossed his keys on the counter, like the house had always been his to return to. He sat down, twirled a forkful, and said it casual. Like weather talk. I think we'll finish the paperwork next week. Once Bethany's notarized everything, we'll send it in. I didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't frown. I nodded just once, sipped water. Sounds good? I said. And that was it. He went back to eating. Bethany joined a few minutes later, rubbed her belly, asked about my shift, like she hadn't suggested I leave a week ago. I answered politely. Like someone playing along with a story they didn't write but knew how it ended. After dinner, I washed the dishes. Dried them, put each one back in its exact place. The cabinet doors clicked shut like punctuation. Upstairs I heard them laughing, planning, forgetting, and I stood at the bottom of the stairs, hand on the banister, heart beating steady. He thought I was staying quiet. But I was simply staying ready. I waited 2 more days. Then I took the will to the copy center across town. Not the one near our house. Too many eyes. The clerk didn't ask questions. He just slid the paper through the scanner, glanced at the notary seal, and said, "You want this on thick stock or standard?" Thick, I said, like memory. I left with 3 certified copies, one for me, one for the lawyer, and one I didn't label, a not yet. Back home, I hid them in different places. Not because I was scared. Because I was methodical. One went under the false bottom of the first aid drawer, one behind the air vent in my closet. The last, tucked between 2 cookbooks, Bethany never touched. I emailed John Campbell that night. Subject, confirmation of ownership. Attached a PDF with every document Eli had never expected me to find. No rage, no revenge letter. Just facts. In the meantime, I began to reclaim small things. I called the bank, spoke to a real person. Requested to reassign all paper statements back to my name and address. The woman on the phone hesitated. "Mom, our system shows a power of attorney was filed under a secondary name." "Bethany." "That's incorrect," I said. Firm. "I have the original will, filed by the attorney who wrote it. No POA override was ever authorized." I emailed her the proof. Waited, heard her typing. Then she came back. "Yes, Mom. I'll get this corrected today." My name returned to the account dashboard by noon. And that night, I made a new password Eli wouldn't guess. He used to call me Clementine, as a joke because of my orange scrubs. It never occurred to him I'd use it against him. The next day, I cleaned out the filing cabinet. Every envelope, every forged document, every signature that slanted just slightly too far to the left. I marked them with sticky notes. Suspect, false authorization, account tie-in, a color-coded, labeled, scanned again. Not out of paranoia, out of clarity. I wasn't building a case to punish. I was building a record to protect. Because betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes, it comes with envelopes, and folders, and silence. The next morning, I walked into the hospital's HR office on my break. I didn't make an appointment. Didn't announce it ahead of time. Just knocked twice and stepped inside with a copy of my employee ID and a question I already knew the answer to. Janelle, the admin on duty, looked up from her keyboard. She liked me. Always saved me the better pens during annual paperwork week. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just need to check if anyone requested medical verification under my name in the past year," I said. "For insurance or legal purposes." She blinked. Like a disability form. Something like that? Says she typed, paused, frowned. There was a release form submitted 6 months ago, seen by someone claiming to be you. She turned the screen slightly, but not enough for me to see. Do you mind printing it? I asked. Just for my records. Janelle hesitated, then nodded. The printer clicked on, spitting out 3 sheets. She handed them to me without commentary. I read them in the hallway. Alone. The form listed my name, my job title, and a request for verification A of mental fitness. Box 3B was checked. Confirm if employee is currently under psychological monitoring or unable to perform duties due to cognitive decline. My signature was at the bottom, or something trying to be. It leaned too far left, looped too smooth. Eli never practiced my signature well enough. The return address, not mine, not even close. I folded the paper once, twice, slipped it into the folder I kept in my locker, behind the spare socks and energy bars. That night, I scanned the form. Labeled it. Sir HR forgery suspected. Added it to the folder on my desktop I now called Zach's, for when they denny everything. I didn't cry. Didn't feel angry. Just quietly resolved. Because now I knew they weren't just stealing a house. They were stealing who I was allowed to be, and I wasn't done being her. I started with the closet. Pushed aside the coats I barely wore, the ones Eli said were too heavy for Georgia anyway. I pulled out the storage bins from the floor. Old journals, tax files, a pair of running shoes I never broke in. I stacked them neatly, boxed the items I didn't need. And for the first time in years, my room felt like mine again. The bed got fresh sheets. Gray flannel. The kind Mama used in winter. I changed the bulb in the reading lamp. Replaced the drawer liner in my nightstand. Even moved the dresser a few inches to the left. Just because I could. Reclaiming doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just measuring how your own feet sound on your own floor. Next, I changed the lock on my door. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. The old key went into the trash. The new one stayed in my pocket. When Ali noticed the click of the new lock, he raised an eyebrow. You locking yourself in now? I looked at him once. Didn't answer. Kept walking. Upstairs, I opened the wardrobe. Taped something inside the door. A single sheet of paper. Type-centered. Us not erased. Nasa not broken as Oxas just awake doxas below it. I taped a list of file names from my encrypted folder, so I'd never forget what they tried to make disappear. That night, Bethany knocked lightly. Dinner was ready. I said I wasn't hungry. Didn't offer a reason. Didn't ask what they made. The silence stretched thin. Then faded. I sat at my desk as the house hummed around me. Soft music, distant laughter, a dishwasher I bought running for people who stopped thanking me. They didn't know what I had in my drawer, didn't know what I'd found or what I'd copied or who I'd already spoken to. But they would. Soon. And when they did, they'd learn that quiet doesn't mean weak. It means watching, it means collecting, it means staying 5 steps ahead without ever raising your voice. If they knew I had every document, every forged form, every redirected letter, every lie in ink, would they still pretend nothing happened? I met John Campbell on a Thursday. His office smelled like cedar and lemon polish. Like nothing had ever been rushed there. He wore suspenders. Used a fountain pen. Still filed things in manila folders with handwritten tabs. He didn't ask for a backstory. Didn't need one. I handed him a black binder, labeled in quiet ink, VAR Property and Identity, Monroe L. Sayre inside, 3 notarized copies of the original will, a scan of the forged power of attorney, HR documentation with mismatched addresses, bank statements, fake signatures, a timeline. He flipped through slowly. Eyes sharp behind thick lenses, murmured once, very clean. Then he closed the binder, folded his hands, and looked at me. Do you want to go public? I shook my head. No lawsuits, no police. I don't want a war. He nodded, as if he already knew. Then you want what I call a correction. Yes. We outlined the plan on 3 yellow legal pads. Not dramatic. Not messy. Just steps, facts, dates. I told him I wanted one meeting, one brunch, neutral setting, just Eli, Bethany, and me. Family reconciliation, I said. Let the phrase hang like air freshener over what we both knew it really meant. He smiled. You bring the quiet, I'll bring the papers. We scheduled it for the following Saturday. Private room at a restaurant downtown. Early enough that Bethany would assume it was about baby peace offerings, ear and closure. And maybe it was. Just not for her. I left his office lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I was free yet, but because I had a map. And maps mean you stop wandering. That night, I walked past Eli in the hall. He said, "Everything good?" and sipped his tea like the world still made sense. I smiled. Yep, thinking of doing brunch next weekend. Just us. Talk things through. He looked surprised, then relieved. Yeah, that'd be good. I nodded and walked on. Quiet revenge doesn't need noise. It starts with perfect planning. The night before the brunch, I cleared the dining table in my room. Not for printing. Pages slid from the tray in steady rhythm. Will, bank logs, forged HR forms, side-by-side signatures, mine and not mine. Each one went into a crisp folder, labeled, tabbed, dated. I laid them out like silverware before a final meal. No anger, no rush, just precision. That morning, I ironed the blouse Mama used to wear to church. Soft blue. Buttons slightly loose, but the fabric still held its shape like memory does. I found a photo of her and Dad on their anniversary. Standing in front of the porch, holding hands, smiling like they knew something deeper than luck. I slid the picture into my bag. Didn't say why. Just knew it belonged there. The restaurant was small, quiet, tucked behind a florist and a bookstore on Habersham Street. I'd reserved the back room. Private, window light, one long table and 3 chairs. I sent John Campbell the final agenda at 80 Helzer a.m. sharp. He replied 2 minutes later, "Us confirmed. Will arrive discreetly. No surprises. Das." I stood by the mirror one last time. Tied my hair back. Checked my pocket for the flash drive, even though I didn't need it. Then I reached for the final envelope. The one with my name in thick black ink. The one I'd tape over their version if I had to. I placed it in my purse, next to my keys and that photo of Mama and Dad. Outside, the sky was overcast. The kind of gray that tells you something's coming. Not a storm, but a shift. I stepped onto the porch, closed the door behind me, and whispered to no one in particular. Time to bring my name back. The hostess led me to the back room at precisely 2. I set my purse down, aligned the folders in front of my seat, then asked for water with lemon, just like Mama used to do. At 10:11, I heard footsteps. Soft laughter. Bethany entered first, wearing a pale pink dress that whispered, "Innocence." Eli followed, button up untucked, still smiling like this was a peace offering instead of a reckoning. "Hey," he said, pulling out a chair. "You look nice." "Thanks," I said, kept my hands folded. Steady. Bethany placed her bag on the table. "You didn't have to do all this. It means a lot." I nodded, waited, then glanced at the door. John Campbell entered quietly, tan jacket, briefcase in hand, kind eyes but not soft. Eli's smile froze just a little. "Who's this?" he asked, half laughing. "A friend," I said, "from Dad's time. You remember John, don't you?" Eli's jaw twitched. Bethany shifted in her seat. John nodded politely. Sat, opened his case with a calm that only years of experience and clean paperwork can bring. I slid the first folder across the table. Toward Eli. Then the second, toward Bethany. Bank records, the will, the fake HR form, power of attorney comparison, no accusations. Just documentation. "This," I said, "is the truth. On paper." Eli didn't touch the folder. Not yet. Bethany flipped hers open. Eyes scanning fast, then slower, then stopping altogether. She looked at him, then back at me. "You had this the whole time." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. I just watched Eli. Watched the exact moment his throat tightened and his eyes darted to every exit in the room but mine. He picked up the will. Read the first few lines. Paused. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, not a defense. Not an apology. Just silence. John leaned forward. Mr. Monroe, your father's will is legally binding. Your sister remains the sole owner of the property in question. Any further attempt to misrepresent that will be treated accordingly. Still, Eli said nothing. He looked down at the documents, then up at me. And for the first time, he looked scared. No one raised their voice. There were no slammed fists, no broken glasses. Just silence, thick and spreading, like ink spilled across a tablecloth you forgot to protect. Bethany sat back slowly. Her fingers, once laced with Eli's, pulled away. She looked at him like she didn't recognize the man she was supposed to build a life with. John gathered his case, closed it with a soft snap. He stood, tipped his head toward me. Everything you need is here, he said. To reclaim, not to punish. I nodded, didn't stand, didn't speak. He left quietly, his shoes making no sound against the polished floor. Eli still hadn't moved. His hand rested on the edge of the folder, but he didn't open the rest. He stared at the table like it had betrayed him, not the other way around. Bethany was the first to break the stillness. She cleared her throat. Why wouldn't you just tell us? I turned to her, calm. I didn't need to tell you what was already mine. She looked away, toward the window, toward anything that wasn't the truth sitting in front of her. Eli finally spoke, soft, barely above a whisper. You're really going to take it all back? I looked him dead in the eye. My name, my space, my place in the family you tried to rewrite. Yes. He blinked, but there were no tears, not from him, not from me. I reached forward, lifted the first folder, then the next. Stacked them, edge-aligned. There was something deeply satisfying about the sound of pages being returned to their owner. As I stood, I smoothed my blouse, straightened my shoulders. I won't take this to court, I said. But I will take back what's mine. No threats, no rage, just facts. I walked out of that room with everything I brought. And none of the weight they'd tried to leave behind. The truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just walks away, tall, unbothered, and holding every last receipt. The house was quiet when I returned. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that holds breath. Like the walls were waiting to see what I'd do next. Bethany's shoes were missing from the rack. The living room shelves, once cluttered with her baby books and scented candles, were bare. A suitcase stood by the stairs. Half zipped, half ready. Eli wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't in the den. His keys were gone, but the air still held the scent of his aftershave. I went to my room, closed the door behind me, sat at my desk and opened the account dashboard. It took less than 5 minutes to revoke joint access. One click, one password, one confirmation. Then I printed a form. Change of household registry. Bethany Monroe removed. The paper curled as it cooled from the printer. I signed it slowly, steady hand, no rush. Downstairs I heard footsteps. Bethany at the door, her voice low. She wasn't crying, wasn't pleading, just tired. I didn't go down, didn't wave goodbye, didn't ask where they'd go. Instead, I opened the hall closet. Pulled out a small wooden box Dad had built when we moved in. Inside were old documents, school awards, a lock of Eli's hair from his first trim, and the first mortgage receipt with my signature. Faded but clear, I placed the change of registry form on top, closed the box, slid it back into place. When I finally stepped outside my room, the suitcase was gone. The car was gone. The only thing left on the table was a sticky note. Blank, no apology, no explanation, just absence posing as closure. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the chair by the window, looked at the porch swing I once fixed so Eli could study outside, and I breathed. Not deep, not victorious, just even. They had erased me in ink. I reclaimed myself in silence. I stood at the threshold of Eli's old room. The door creaked, just like it used to when he'd sneak in after curfew, thinking I wouldn't hear. The air inside smelled faintly of worn cotton and dust. His posters were still taped to the wall, corners curling, edges faded. The bookshelf leaned slightly to the right, Still holding paperbacks, he never returned to the library. A baseball glove rested on the dresser. One I bought from a second-hand shop when he made junior varsity. I didn't touch anything. Didn't fold his clothes or box up his high school hoodie with the fraying collar. I just stood there and let the silence settle. This room once held his nightmares, his fevers, his secrets, his first tears after telling me he didn't want to grow up because growing up meant I might leave. I never did. I didn't leave, even when I probably should have. Now, he was the one who left, by choice, by signature, by silence. I closed the door gently. No need to slam what had already closed itself. Back in my room, I opened the wardrobe bar and reached for the old cedar box buried beneath blankets. Inside, a letter, folding lines soft with time. Edges worn, ink slightly smudged from one night I cried reading it. Dad's handwriting, firm but kind. La. You keep this house together. Even when no one sees it. Even when you don't feel strong. This place holds because of you. I read it twice. Then again. I didn't need the words to be new for them to still mean everything. I placed the letter back in the box. Closed it. Returned it to its corner. Then I whispered. Fend to the walls, to myself, to the quiet that had always known me best. Still do. 1 month later, the house was still standing. No doors slammed. No footsteps overhead. No muffled laughter behind half-closed doors I wasn't invited through. Just quiet. The real kind. The kind you earn. I didn't redecorate. Didn't paint over what happened. I just rearranged. The nursery became a reading room. Still soft blue, but with shelves instead of cribs. A lamp Mama gave me sat in the corner, finally plugged in. I donated the matching dinnerware set. The one Bethany insisted on registering, despite already living in my house. Replaced it with my chipped mug, the one I always reached for before I knew I was being phased out. The garden came back to life, bit by bit. I dug out weeds Eli said weren't worth saving, planted tomatoes and rosemary. No grand plan, just roots in the dirt, the way healing starts. The mailbox had my name again, only mine. Bills came to me. Decisions ran through me. There was no second key floating in someone else's pocket. And for the first time, the air inside the house felt like it belonged to me. Then came the call. Ava from pediatrics, soft-voiced, a little nervous. We have a girl. 8 years old. No one's claimed her. She's been here 3 nights. Keeps asking for the nurse with the tired eyes who gave her the peanut butter crackers. I remembered her. Curly hair, knees scraped raw, silent unless you offered food and space. Her name's Melody, Ava said. She doesn't trust anyone. But she asked if she could sit with you again. We're running out of time. I didn't think. Didn't write a pro-con list. Didn't wonder if the house was ready for someone else. It was. By that weekend, Melody had a bed, a toothbrush, a drawer of her own. She didn't talk much. Only nodded when I asked if the pasta was okay. Fell asleep with her shoes on for the first 4 nights. But on the 5th, she took them off. Folded her socks. Hung her coat on the same hook where Eli used to leave his backpack. I didn't ask questions. Didn't rush her. I just left the porch light on and the back door open while I chopped carrots and kept the music low. Sometimes, healing doesn't knock. It just walks in and sets its small bag down without saying a word. That night, I lay in bed, hearing Melody's soft breathing through the wall. No tension. No waiting for footsteps to tiptoe around betrayal. Just breath. Mine, hers even. Present. And for the first time I live here. Not just stay. I sat at the kitchen table just after sunrise. A cup of coffee cooling beside me, the house still quiet, except for the soft shuffle of Melody's feet upstairs. In front of me a single sheet of paper. Blank, waiting. I pulled out a pen, lettered, and wrote at the top, "Has to the version of me at 25, the one who stayed." I paused. Let the silence settle. Then I began. You were scared. Set, I remember that. Your hands shook the night they called to say they didn't make it. You thought you'd never be enough. You almost ran. Almost left Georgia, left Eli, left everything. But you stayed. You gave up California, Traded med school for night shifts and me down scrubs thal and frozen lasagna. You thought that made you small. It didn't. It made you steady. It made you brave. You raised a boy who forgot to remember you. And that hurts more than anything I can put into ink. But this isn't a letter about pain. It's about proof. You were never weak. Even when you cried into the bathroom towel, so ill I wouldn't hear. Even when the bank statements didn't match, and no one believed you. Even when you stood alone with every receipt and no apology. You didn't scream. You didn't collapse. You built a case. You stood your ground. You walked into that brunch with your name intact and your dignity returned. You didn't win loudly. But you won. You still are. There's a girl upstairs, with skin knees, valiant eyes, that don't flinch when I walk into the room anymore. She left a drawing on the fridge yesterday. 2 stick figures. Both with curly hair. She labeled them as me and you. No one told her to. You gave her that. A house that holds, because you kept it standing. A door that stays open, because you never let them close it for good. So thank you. Thank you for not running. Thank you for sacrificing and staying and holding and healing. Even when no one clapped. Even when no one said your name. Even when they crossed it out. I see you now. Completely. Finally, love, you. I folded the letter. Slid it into the cedar box with the will, the picture of Mama and Dad, and a note that simply said Azure, everything that mattered. I kept Doc. Then I closed the lid. Set it gently back in the top drawer of the wardrobe. Melody called from the hallway. Something about pancakes. I smiled, tucked the box away, and walked out of the room without looking back. Some legacies are loud, built with names on buildings and voices in headlines. Mine was made of paper doors and truth and choices that didn't clap back. But it held. It stayed. It stood. Truth wins, even quietly.